Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to thank St. Paul of the Cross Province. I'd like to thank Holy Cross Province and the POPs Committee proclaiming our Passionist story. Uh, right now, today, we are finishing up. Today is the 24th of October, and we are finishing up in the Passionist world, the General Chapter, which is gathered in Rome, Italy. This general chapter occurs every 6 years. The general chapter, as I will explain, is an opportunity for Passionists throughout the world to look at their mission, to understand the vowed life as Passionists, and to understand the long-term past and legacy and future of the founder, St. Paul of the Cross. So this Zoom lecture provides a context for this general chapter, and it is primarily historical context that I would like to address and invite you to enter into. So the Superior General is the designation for the leader who is directing the Passionist congregation throughout the world. And this has been the name given or the title given to the leader of the Passionists, really since the founder was named Paul of the Cross, St. Paul of the Cross, and the congregation began in 1720. Just out of office now is Father Joel Cambrigo. He has been from Myanmar. He is from Myanmar, and he has been associated with the Passionists from Australia, and that's his direction in life and ministry and as a vowed Passionist. I want to thank him personally because I'm thankful for the support he's given me as a historian and also in my study of the Passionists in China. I think it's important also to know, at least from my perspective, that a major contribution that Father Joachim offered to the congregation was through his letters and his pronouncements. I believe that his insights with the use to scripture and the respect for Passionist tradition and spirituality was very good in the way he used his language and the content of his letters to address Passionists and the public who might be associated with the Passionist membership moving forward into the future. So that is a particular insight that I gained from him. The Passionists who are gathered here in Rome, I'm in the United States right now in Boston, Massachusetts, but the Passionists who were gathered during this time in Rome came with a couple different approaches. And you see this manifest on the image that is on the screen. They came to look at the inner life or the spirituality. They came to look at the meaning of belonging, or how are their companions in the journey of ministry. That would be the vowed members and also increasingly members of lay ministry or people employed by the Passionists to involve or make their ministry known throughout the world. And then new ministries. As each generation emerges, there are new ministries to respond to the signs of the time. And then a key dimension which occurs to this notion of synodality or discussion of how to engage in the future of the mission revolves around what is called the configurations. I'll explain that as we proceed forward, but the configurations are areas of vowed Passionists who are associated together to advance the purpose of the Passionist congregation throughout the world and in many different forms. But this is the process that these 80 Passionists are now gathering and completing their work at the General Chapter. On October 17th, a new Superior General was elected, Father Giuseppe Carrara, who's from Italy. And I think it's quite important to see that the membership of the Passionists are from all over the world. So you see that we have Passionists in leadership now to assist, and this is called the General Council of Father Carrara. The Passionists from Scotland. We have Passionists from a Passionist from Portugal, Passionists from India, Peru, Tanzania, and Brazil. So they represent different language groups. They represent different spiritualities. They represent the many Passionists who belong as vowed membership and as also experience of ministry throughout the world where the Passionists are located. So I show this because the rest of this lecture gives a historical context on the present reality, but I think to understand the leadership at this point in 2024, the purpose of this Zoom is to enrich our appreciation of how we got to this point in 2024. So it's as you come to this lecture and as are listening to this lecture, I think it's of value to ask yourself, why did you decide to listen to this lecture, and what's your interest in this lecture? Is it because you know me as a Passionist historian? Is there a Passionist that you know in this title, in this topic, provides interest to you? Are you affiliated or know of some kind of ministry site that has had a meaning to you in your life? Do you always thought, or do you always think of the Passionists as being local? So wherever you are in the world, you think of the Passionists as being in a respective nation, country, ministry site. And is this something, this lecture, is this going to broaden your horizon and make you hopefully appreciate the international scope of the Passionist congregation? The other implicit issue that we might address, and I ask you to think about, is what does suffering mean? What does suffering mean? The death, resurrection of Jesus Christ within the culture in which you live. And as we look at a world context and with scripture and tradition, how do we enter into the history of the Passionist identity of the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus? And how do we look at the future of the suffering, death, resurrection of Jesus, especially as we see it in different cultures? So as we go through this, how do the Passionists speak in the world today? And increasingly, there's a discussion on what it means to be a Passionist vowed priest or brother, but also a member of the so-called Passionist family. That is, what are people who look at Passionist spirituality and ministries, how are they identifying with the Passionist mission or experience in their own personal life, or how they hope to aspire to it in their future experiences? So these are some of the larger contexts that enrich the historical presentation, and I hope they will be part of your thinking process as you move forward and listen to my presentation. I think also a very valuable dimension is to look at this configuration model. This is a new model that emerged really since 1988. It goes out of a nation-based model, and it sets up Passionists in worldwide locations so that the vowed Passionists and the interests in ministry or the purpose of ministry can be utilized in a way that might be more productive on many different areas of finance, language, of spirituality, all these different components. You might look at this and realize that the numbers of vowed members here gives you a strong indication of the numerical placement of Passionists throughout the world. For example, the Jesus crucified configuration is part of the US configuration. So that has 317 members. Many people might be surprised, and again, this is one of the purposes of this lecture, to realize that the PASPAC, or the Asia Pacific area, has the most numbers, 447 members, and then the Europe-based Italian area is second with 345. And then what I would loosely call Spanish historic speaking areas of language or culture or historical ministry have 298, Africa with 224, and the traditional Catholic or European regions are the lowest number of members at 135. These numbers of the present day don't necessarily always relate to the historic importance. This is just the way the Passionist leadership is trying to move forward in the future. And I think it is helpful when you look at the present Superior General and his General Counsel, the image I just showed you before. So where are the Passionists located? This is of importance because among the Passionists now, there are today, in 2024, 1,766 Passionists. And I put this image of citizenship and passport forward to you because I've selected a couple of different areas out of the 57 nations, and you see them listed here if you wish to just look at this while I'm speaking, the 57 nations that we're in, and I've selected a couple and highlighted their color to show their regional differences. For example, Asia. Also in blue, you see the Americas, and you see Europe in the black, and you can see the number of Passionists associated with each one of these respective areas of these 57 countries. Again, I've just selected something for the point of emphasis. In the gold there, I've emphasized areas that are constantly in the news, so that I think we think about Passionists who are working in this area of Ukraine, Israel, and Haiti. It's important, I think, to notice in all these areas that the names at times historically of these geographic regions change. For example, you will see in terms of Israel that at times that area specifically has been named Palestine. It's also at times in other identifications known as the Holy Land. So this is of value for us to remember that Passionists are in ministry sites all over the world, and they are often caught in and contribute to the social, political understanding of these particular nations and these particular locales. So that's an important. And the key point in the citizenship and passport idea is if Passionists are ministering and attempt to minister and hope to minister all over the world, they can only go to areas where their passport is provided to be accepted. So not all places accept the passports of citizens who are Passionists all over the world. And this is increasingly, for anyone who's traveled, important, a travel concern, safety concern, and it defines world identity in our society today. I'd like to go back here and start more in the historical perspective. In 1952, there were 4,000 Passionists. So this is part of a booklet that was done in the United States, and it shows that the Passionists were in 33 countries, not 57 as there are today. And they designated 10 foreign mission areas. So this idea of mission was an important aspect of world identity of Catholicism, and in fact Protestant and many religious groups looking at the world as a missionary venture, a missionary experience. And seeing that this country and mission relationship was operative, it shows how much the world has changed since 1952. But where were the Passionists in 1952? When we break this down in a much more realistic and precise way, I've put the European nations in red, the Americas in blue, the Holy Land in a blue-gray, Asia, Australia in gold, and Africa in green. And if you take a moment and just look at this carefully, what you see here sequentially by date is how the Passionists moved from Italy through Europe to the United States, eventually to Australia, to the Holy Land or Palestine, and then kept expanding and developing its presence into the 1920s throughout Germany, Poland, Austria, and then into South America, and expanded once again into Canada and into other parts of Europe and Asia. So notice the terminology of the names, for instance, like Borneo, and then just the general grouping of Africa, per se, in 1934. So this is a good indication of 1950s Passionist identity. And when we think of the world in the 1950s, and we think of it now in 2024, it gives us a good perspective to appreciate the growth and the development and the decision-making process that's had to be in place among the Passionists. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the respective superior generals since 1900. We could go back to the 1780s, but for the purpose of this lecture, I'm concentrating on the modern period because I think it's much more helpful to limit the scope as it strengthens our understanding for our present day. You'll notice the colors that are going to be used in all of these particular images of these particular superior generals. The graphics, if they're in yellow, as I'm speaking, look at the material. The graphics in yellow represent and pertain to what I have designated as historic leadership and structure issues. The graphics in gray represent what I would say is Passionist spirituality. The green graphics represent something that corresponds to church-state relations, world issues, or civil issues. The pink concentration applies to mission and evangelization. So as I go through it and you look at yourself at these graphics, you will immediately be drawn to these different areas. But as I also raise the topics, you might say, well, you would think of this in terms of theological point of view, other point of view, or maybe you yourself would look at it in a combined matrix where you would accentuate, based on your own interests of why you're at this lecture, another way of interpretation. And that's very valid. How to see this as a rich history is something that Passionists, and I think many people, welcome. I should also say that in red, you see that Blessed Bernard Silvestrelli, he is considered a very holy man and is also on the road towards canonization. So I just want to break this down a little bit so that you're able to understand this. But getting back to the man himself, what we see here is we see that there's disputes involved. And in this case, with Silvestrelli, it's a dispute that deals with the Irish. And this is in Argentina. My research, and others might do other and have done research on this, is the Irish followed Irish immigration. So partly it was a question of what type of Passionist ministry would the Irish Passionists involve themselves when they went to Argentina? Would they be involved in Passionist missions? Would they be set up parishes? Would they just deal with immigrants who were from Ireland, or work in other specific areas? So this was a dispute. The dispute was over the process of evangelization. No matter the situation, though, the other area, though, is during this time of Silvestrelli from 1878 to 1888, and then there was another interim general because Silvestrelli had health issues and resigned. From 1893 to 1907, the leadership or the provinces of the Passionists, the regions, the normative juridical regions went from 6 to 12, and the Passionist religious expanded from 750 to 1,490. So this was a growth period. And I think that's one of the reasons he's so respected. He asked the Passionists to look at something that's so consistent in our ministry, in our life as Passionists, and all associated with the Passionists. Emphasis on spirituality, solitude, prayer, poverty, and penance. Promote the meaning of the Passion of Jesus through parish missions, spiritual exercises, or other identities of the rule or rule of life. You also see that this is a time of travel. And looking and dealing with the correspondence of the United States and Europe. Italy, of course, was just emerged from city-states or to a nation in 1870. So he had to deal with some of the confiscated government areas of Passionists during this period of change in the post-1870 period that went into the early 1900s. And you'll see as a constant theme throughout this lecture, the area of Mexico requires constant attention. But for people in the United States, this is the time when the United States was divided between two provinces, St. Paul of the Cross province, based out of the eastern United States, Union City, and now in New York, Union City, New Jersey, and now in New York, Jamaica, New York, and Holy Cross province, which is based out of Chicago. So this is the 1900 Bernard Silvestrelli. When he resigned, mainly for health, there was an interim point of 2 years before Silvestrelli went back, and the Superior General was Saverio, Francisco Saverio, and he put his attention towards the canonization of Passionist Bishop Vincent Strombi and Dominic Barbary. So he also began to pay attention to looking at Rome as a student house, but you begin to appreciate that even in his short tenure, each general or each leader takes on some kind of specific task or specific mission to try to advance the cause of the Passionists throughout the world, structurally and in terms of ministry. We come now to 1908 to 1914, and we look at the Superior General. His name was another Italian, Angelucci. In terms of leadership, what's important is he began to travel more, and he visited all the different Passionist locations. He had a personalized style of leadership that allowed him really to have the means to travel. He sort of broke out of that Roman vesture, and he went to South America, Europe, North America, and Bulgaria. Bulgaria, of course, was the first mission that the Passionists sent up. And you see other areas of Passionist ministry and evangelization in pink, and that's Belgium and Holland are united really to look at with attention to Bulgaria, and the Passionists go to Peru and the Amazon. United States and people really in ecumenical circles might be interested to know that Father Fidelis Kent Stone, who was from the United States, was a general consultor at this time, and he actually went to the Argentine to try to settle some of the tensions that were going on in Argentina. and he investigated the possibility of establishing a ministry throughout greater parts of South America, but he thought it right at that time it was too tenuous. So he urged the Passionist Superior General, in this case Angelucci, to back off from expanding into South America because there were many different factors that were still unresolved as South America was evolving, and also as the Passionists were evolving worldwide. So you see the consultation process here that's developing. You see also the Passionists in spirituality, and in some of the areas they are setting up work in France, actually through separation of church and state. They actually begin now to open up their mission in Palestine. So there's a lot of activity at the early part of this point, from 1908 to 1914. Silvio de Veza is the Superior General from 1914 to 1925. He looks at issues of civil issues that correspond to the period of World War I. During this time, he faces the tension that's taking on Europe and really causing problems in Europe because of World War I. He looks at the leadership because over 400 Italian and French religious were involved in this whole aspect. He sent letters to the religious advising comfort in the midst of war. He's dealing with some of the post-suppression laws of 1870. And he's also looking towards a spiritual interest to look at looking at the letters of St. Paul of the Cross. He's trying to look at the spirituality of Paul of the Cross. He's looking at the 1917 revision of canon law. You see that in gray. Another key aspect that emerges at this point in time is a very important papal document, the Apostolic Letter of Benedict XV, which is Maximum Illud. This is a document that shows that the religious orders and the church worldwide should take the ending of the First World War in 1918 as a new missionary impulse. It's issued to say that missionary impulse throughout the world is valuable and needed, and it's a specific way to look in competition at this time with Protestants. So Catholics, and the Passionists are Catholic religious order, they are now in competition with Protestants. And so you see a competition between Catholics and Protestants. This is not an ecumenical world at this time. That comes later in the understanding of religion. This is a respectful but competitive and sometimes contentious world between Catholics and Protestants. And you see this, the document is an opportunity for Passionists now to participate. But you also are aware here that the provinces and the leadership are becoming stronger. You see Australia as a Passionist locale. You see Spain and Brazil and Holland as a Passionist locale. And these important missions of China begin in 1921, Germany in 1922, and Poland in 1923. So this period of 1914 to 1925, amid World War I, shows organizational, spiritual, and hopeful ways of looking at the world into the future. Leo Kirkles, in my mind, is probably one of the more dynamic and understudied and unique Passionists, given his leadership in the Passionist congregation and his leadership after being the Passionist Superior General. Kirkles is very much now immersed in the impact of the 1917 canon law changes. So he has to implement that. He unites Ireland and Scotland as a juridical area and tries to bring some cohesive sense of mission there. He sees the importance of missionary activity and sends the Belgian Passionists into the Belgian Congo, as it was known at that time. He looks at a much more rigorous sense of Passionist identity in regard to intellectual studies. He looks at documents that highlight the spiritual life and intellectual life of Passionist religious formation. What he's trying to do is he's trying to actually advance piety, intellectual life, and spirituality along the lines of the debate that revolves around modernism. That's the role of science and religion from the 1890s into the modern period, and the role of scripture development and the use of philosophy, theology. What does it mean to be a Passionist internationally? And are there norms that Passionists should study within the congregation and that should be implemented with a more rigorous or more stylized idea? And then how would that be fleshed out in the respective areas or parts of the world where the Passionists are located? So this is an organizational structure of theology and also formation for Passionist priests and somewhat related with brothers into the future. This whole idea of Passionist congruency is valuable. What he does, though, is after his tenure as the Superior General, he's asked to be the apostolic delegate to India. He becomes the first apostolic internuncio, and this is valuable because of his ministry there. Here you see, as a papal legate, the papal representative, he's at the Eucharistic Congress in 1938. And the question that arises from this particular image is, what does he bring of his Passionist identity in terms of his knowledge and theology background into the unique world of changing India from British status to moving towards an independent status? What are the skills diplomatically, theologically, organizationally that Leo Kirkles brings to this? And in what way does his Passionist identity bring and accentuate this world vision of a new India Catholic voice and Catholic spirituality within an Indian context? In the general archives of Rome, there are scrapbooks of Kirkles when he was apostolic delegate. This is very valuable material for photography and looking at the way that this Indian church is developing at this time in the various, and how they develop in the various states, the Catholic population in the various states, especially in relationship to Hindus and in the many different dynamics of a modernized India that has been under British rule and now is moving towards its own identity as its own nation, moving in that regard. So he holds, Leo Kirkles is a Passionist, as an important superior general, but in his post-Passionist life, his leadership in the world church is also worthwhile. So a full biography of him merits attention. Then we move into 1931 with the Superior General Ficinoci, and he is looking, and this is a very valuable statement I think, for all of us to hear. He's looking at the retreat at St. John and Paul, and that's the mother house or the primary residence of the Passionists in Rome. And he looks towards the provinces or the regions of the world, and he says, if we're going to build a new wing and we represent you worldwide, we need your financial help to do this. Now, look at the years this is taking place. This is taking place amid the Great Depression, which we now know was a worldwide depression. So as the world is in a Great Depression, a building program is being advanced, and the regions of the world that are Passionists are asked to contribute to them, even in their struggles to maintain financial stability in the United States or throughout the world. At China, for instance, this is a period of relative safety in China, but China still is caught in much chaos, for instance. And you have the post-World War I era of Germany. So all of these areas are very unique areas that are unfolding. And you see also the Passionists, even during the time of the Depression, the Passionists are moving into Tanganyika in Africa. They also are in trying to assess what is the role in Germany. The Passionists decide that they are going to make Germany an area responsible to the general operations in Rome. So that's a legal issue to make sure that Germany continues and try their best to handle the situation in Germany, because they need at least 25 religious, and they don't have that number. The United States has sent missionaries to Germany at this time. They also encourage the USA to go to Canada. So this is a time of growth. They also talk about observance of the rule. And then we see attention paid by the Passionists in Rome, the men to the Passionist nuns. And so you see that this is an important period of financial dynamics, but also international relationships and ministries in many regards that are moving forward. Then Father Cerrone is another Passionist, and he is the Superior General for 9 years. Normally, again, the term is 6, but he's superior during the time of the World War II. And again, World War II, and we have to be aware how we frame this out chronologically. In Asia, this is a time of the anti-Japanese war from 1937 to 1945. In Europe, this is a time of war from 1937 to 1945. In the United States, it's designated as a time from 1941 to 1945. So he is the leader of the Passionists through this time frame, and because of war, they cannot hold a general chapter. So it's suspended. So it shows you how political situations determine religious situations. And I think that in our present day is always something to be reminded of. So the next chapter is celebrated after the war is over, World War II, in the European and Pacific theater. And you see that there's tremendous sufferings, which I'll address in a second, that occurred in the German Foundation, in the Polish Foundation, and in the French province between 1939 and 1945. Belgium and Holland and Italy also suffered a great deal. So we have to remember that the Passionist mission continued through war. This was not just a life lived in monasteries. This was a life lived in realities of human suffering, human hope, and a witness of self-sacrifice of ministry, of people who knew and lived the cross and passion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Look at the letters he writes, though. 1937. In the midst of this chaos, how does he actually write letters? And to what issues does he write these letters? He says, the vocation should be promoted and safeguarded. Well, that seems pretty normal. But at the same time, how do you hold on to your vocation if you're beset by war and problems? How do you say, I'm going to still hold to my passionist vocation? I'm not going to leave the congregation. This is when your witness becomes most strong or most tested or most sanctified. And it has to accompany a spirit of prayer. So you see that addressed in 1938, and then solitude. Many people who are in the midst of war and personal people, and we all see this in our own life, when things get very challenging for us, we might still be active, but we find our life goes into a spirit of solitude, and we need to draw on prayer, our own sense of solitude, and we come face to face with our own identity. And that's really what these three letters address. And at a time when it seems that everyone should be practical, but what these letters remind us that even in times that seem totally irrelevant and out of sorts, that the spiritual identity and religious identity of people never go away. This is probably when it's most needed. And then we see the Dutch go into Borneo in Indonesia. So this is a very critical time for Passionists, and it has, as you will see next, implications that I think we are now feeling in 2024 the memory of in many positive ways and many realistic ways in terms of leadership and structure. Albert Dean becomes the Superior General from 1946 to 1952. If you notice the image that's highlighted in green, he, in his own family situation, had to move about. Now, exactly what this means, I'm not sure. This is from material I was able to get from the Passionist General website, but his family was forced to immigrate to various countries due to wars and economic poverty. So you see, the Passionists themselves have a very acute awareness of what it means to be a person or an immigrant on the move. Many people enter religious life or have been part of a religious journey that have had them deal with immigration issues or refugee issues, or they're very much akin to the knowledge of this in their own personal life or in their family life. Sometimes it spawns the vocation for people. And maybe you yourself, as you're listening, you know that it's the identification of the suffering that draws you personal in movement of that you've had to make throughout your life, maybe to different countries, that identifies you with the Passionists. And maybe you've sought out Passionist ministries as you've moved from different countries throughout the world. But a different dynamic here is after war is over in 1945, you have nationality, anger, hatred, loss, fear, pain, suffering. And so what does Albert Dean do? He says, we have to make Rome a site for international students to bring the congregation to a greater unity and to encourage the learning of languages. One of the dynamics that occurred during World War II was Passionists, because of their movement, especially through military chaplains. Passionists became much more aware through military chaplaincies in the United States and in other parts of the world. They became aware that we are part of a worldwide congregation. So what Albert Dean does is he says, let's bring new Passionists, new vocations, let's bring them to Rome and encourage study, but also unify it us in terms of nationalities and bring our learn from our worldwide suffering and make it the new languages and to learn of worldwide hope. So the General Chapter of 1952 organizes a standard for lectors, which means educating them along civil lines so that they now can get accreditation structures. For example, in the United States, and this has been going on since the 1920s, but they also are trying to figure out we need trained people in skills of evangelization and academics. So that's an important aspect in 1952, that we must send people to civil universities, not just always to religious seminaries, but can we explore civil universities that help our educated Passionists bring that education back to the congregation? Again, I just want to highlight that Mexico is still on the radar here. Mexico in the 1920s and 1930s has a lot of issues with religion and civil issues that, again, I think are understudied, but are very real for the Passionists who have lived from Spain to Mexico to the Americas and even into the present day. If you want to appreciate the legacy and the contribution of the Congregation of Mexico, this is a very important dynamic to always keep in mind. And leadership, I think, in the present day should investigate this adaptability that the Mexican Passionists have had to live with. They can teach us a lot and we can learn a lot by looking at all of these regions, especially as they have adapted through different crises or in different ministry situations. You see again the spirituality. Let's get the provincials, the rectors, the novice masters, the directors. Everyone should be literally have literal and theological and spiritual formation. Marian devotion is beginning to be emphasized by the popes in 1948 and into the 50s. So that's accentuated under this superior general. And the Passionists keep expanding. Even after war, the Passionists continue to expand. They leave China in 51, but they go to Sweden, they go to Africa, and they also go to, they look at St. Vincent Stromby as the canonization in 1950. But there's also a very important visual here. You see the construction that was done in the Generalate here in Rome, in St. John and Paul, and you see also the Passionist community, international community that is in this photo. I highlight this because the photos actually show a unified Passionist identity in that everybody is wearing the Passionist habit. The money is shown being used to upgrade these Passionist monasteries in Rome, and it's also true that the money is being done to upgrade buildings in other parts of Europe, especially that were decimated by war and hurt by war. The question becomes, though, did they overbuild? Did they just build as a sign of an edifice, as a sign or a symbol that we are back in business and we're ready to go forward? Or was the new adaptive, creative situations where architecture became more practical? In effect, did the building model continue a Roman monastic model when perhaps some opportunities might have been looked at, and again, this is always looking back, where new architectural models of buildings might have been more sufficient and more cost effective. But the issues here also show in this photo that you see Passionists, and you begin to see Passionists identified by name in journals and in other publications, where you see the names now with the photography. So photography is becoming a part of the mission education model And it's not just now written documents. This is from the journal, The Passionist, which was published by Holy Cross Province in Chicago. So this became a unifying force to see the Passionist growth and the Passionist response to the post-World War II era, and all the way from the 50s into the 1960s. There's another point to emphasize here. Here you see in the post-World War II era, you see Father Stanislas Bertin, who's a world-famous philosopher from France, and he was imprisoned under the Nazis. I had a chance to meet Father Stanislas Bertin, and he told me that after he was released from prison, he had to be very, very conscious about getting his body back into shape, because as many people might have heard, if you've done any awareness of this or have heard stories about this, when a lot of people came out of these camps, of concentration camps in Europe, or even internment camps in other locations that might have been in China, or internment camps of German or Italian prisoners that might have existed in the United States, anytime you were in these internment camps, your diet changed. So to give people immediate food could kill them. And he said that he actually had to learn how to eat again by eating grass. He had to cut grass and get his bodily functions and his energy back, and his whole physical ability to digest once again. And so how his suffering might enter into his philosophical understanding, I'll leave that for people who study philosophy. But he was a very important person who brought Passionists to international scope because of his ability in philosophy. You see also Bishop Eugene Basilkoff, who lived from 1900 to 1952. He was under the communists when the communists came into Bulgaria, and he was executed by a firing squad, and his body was never found. And it was through the intervention of the Pope later on, I think it was Pope John Paul II, who said, we need to know where in fact he is. And there was just a notification here that he was executed, and this had a tremendous impact on the struggles of the Bulgarian mission until it was reopened really in the late 1980s and 1980s, when Passionists were able to go to Bulgaria once again, and the mission is again operative. But the suffering and the execution, and Blessed Basilkoff is actually on the road to sainthood, mainly because of the life he lived under the communists and the fact that he was executed under the communist regime. So these two events show the tremendous stress, personal and heroic stress, that Passionists went under, and they represent the people of France, they represent the people of Bulgaria, and really people of the world who suffered during this time on the post-1940s. As we come to the conclusion here, we go now and move quickly into a unique area here, where the superior generals, the next three superior generals, are American, are from the United States. So this tells you that the United States actually now comes out of the World War II era. And while most of the history of the Passionists has been dominated by Europe, they begin to see the strength of the United States experience. So you have Father Malcolm Lavelle from Chicago. He takes on the leadership, and he ends his leadership just as Vatican II is beginning from 1962 to 65. He looks at a revision of the common Passionist rules and regulation. And what that revision means is there's a move from the strict, austere, a worldwide understanding of Passionist life and prayer, which would include waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning and having prayer. And is a revision where that now is optional, or in parts of the world where they realized maybe this Italian-based idea, which added so much strength and stability for a Passionist identity of prayer, penance, and solitude. Now by 1960, 1964, and especially in light of Vatican II, and some other studies that were being done in the 50s in the renewal of religious life, we have to revisit this. So there's a new understanding of the Passionist rule, and this is important moving forward. So the Passionists beginning in 1960 never look like the Passionists of the 1950s. Many might wear the habit, the religious habit. That's always a normative dimension and a valued dimension for Passionists throughout the world, even today. But the rule of life now adapts. And for many people, this is really important, because sometimes people will say, our rule of life can never adapt, but history shows that it does. And it adapts, but it has to adapt for a purpose to move forward, not just for the sake of adaptation. You don't lose your tradition. You value your tradition to keep the tradition into a new vision of the future. He also charged Father Zoffoli, an Italian, to look at the biography of Paul of the Cross. So scholarship is important. He encourages to have students come to Rome. That continues as it had done in the 50s. And you see the Passionists by 54 and 55 going to Papua New Guinea, Jamaica, Jamaica, West Indies, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, the Philippines, New Zealand, South Africa, Ecuador, El Salvador, Paraguay, South Korea. There's beatification of Dominic Barbary, and Malcolm Lavelle sets a parameter where he visits almost all the communities of the Passionists worldwide. The next leader is, I should show you, here are the university students that show that these university students now are important. And you see the highest number of Passionists in 1966 is 4,131. And you all see also, which we'll show on the next slide, you begin to see a decline in membership by later years, within a short time, to 3,238. So these students gain a tremendous insight by being at Vatican II or prior to Vatican II, from the 1940s into the 1960s. This international number of students learn a lot, they engage a lot, they form a tremendous unity where they understand Passionist identity into the world moving forward. The second American general here is Superior Generals Theodore Foley from the Eastern United States. Malcolm Lavelle was from Chicago. He was very important to encourage the ongoing purpose of Vatican II. Vatican II should not just be about rules and regulations, but it should come from the heart of the vowed ministry and vowed Passionists. So he really asked Passionists to look at this. He says he backs the conciliar renewal. Now, while we look at Vatican II as a progressive event, we have to remember that Vatican II was a very contentious event within the church in getting through many of the documents passed through the normal and different sessions of Vatican II that went from 1962 to 65. So he was very much in favor of this. He felt that the Passionists had to move forward, and he begins to have meetings that bring the superiors or the provincials that are operative throughout the world and the general curia. He says, we have to have more meetings together. We have to begin to actually talk to one another. We have to begin to collaborate with insight from you, Passionists throughout the world. What insights can you bring to us so we can make insights that are good for the whole congregation? You see the Passionists expanding into Panama, Honduras, Switzerland, Kenya. And you see, as I mentioned before, the high point of Passionists in many ways, and also a decline of Passionists and begins at this time. And this is the time of many exodus of religious, and this is an after effect of the modernization, just the worldwide change of the 60s on so many fronts, and the Passionists were very much involved in this. So some of their members decided to leave. You also see Passionists living longer. And when Passionists live longer, they sometimes make life changes. So that's another dimension here. And I think that it represents an important person in Passionist leadership. He's up for as a servant of God. He died actually from illness because of his travel. He had a blood clot, as I understand, but he also followed in the footsteps of Malcolm Lavelle, and he traveled throughout the world and saw many of the mission areas. And what's important now is you begin to see a shift in the terminology. Yes, there's mission areas, but we're beginning to start to see that the superior generals and the Passionists are now giving stronger authority to these so-called mission areas to develop on their own in their own style of leadership. So it's not necessarily under the auspices of the Europeans or the Americans, for instance, to the Philippines. The Philippine Passionists are going to develop their own voice. The African Passionists are going to develop their own voice. So this is a shift that begins to take place in the 60s. And you see a person like Barnabas Ahern. I think Barnabas Ahern from Chicago represents, in some ways, a very important person to meditate and think about. Ahern was a brilliant scripture scholar, similar to Donald Sr., and also similar to Passionist from Chicago, Donald Sr. in scripture. He also was very similar to Thomas Berry, a Passionist from the United States. But why I put him up there and call the name of Don Sr. and Thomas Berry to importance is Barnabas freed scripture to almost all the areas of the Passionists. But he was very surprised in my research of him to see the struggles of how scripture and tradition, how Passionist life and tradition are manifest. Just because you have new thinking, you have to keep, and this was Barnabas's anxiety and attention in his own life. How do you take new thinking of Passionist identity, for example, the religious habit, or new thought of theology or scripture or moral theology or economics or leadership? How do you bring new thinking and reconcile it with tradition so that you have a congruent tradition that where you where you come from, you embrace new cultures and new ideas into the future. And when you come back to your general chapter, you realize that you're making decisions out of strength, maybe out of sorrow, but also out of hope. You understand the whole message that's before you for good stewardship and good making of decisions. And you have to rely on skilled people within your congregation, like a Barnabas Ahern, or other people that are emerging throughout the congregation. You have to rely on their expertise and let them speak, because their expertise offers us a great deal. I just want to show very quickly. Here you see the number in 1967, 4,350. 1986, 2,855. 2014, 2,083 members. 2022, 1,848. And if you recall, the number in 2024 was 1,766 in 57 countries. So you can wonder about diminishment, but the other dimension here is you've seen a new understanding of Passionist identity constantly being refluctuated, and now with lay voices, with ministries, with technology, with options available to you, how do you want to advance even as these numbers change and where do vowed members or the members of Passionist family members, or how do people want to identify with us? And how do we look at vowed numbers with other people associated with our mission? This, of course, is from the Catholic hierarchy, and so it only deals with Passionists who are vowed. But how do you look at statistics when there's more involved in all these 57 countries in the world than just the vowed members? The vowed members and the people of God actually have to work and are working together. And how do we quantify and be thankful for that? And how do we adapt in these situations? The last superior generals here, and I'll be ending in about 5 minutes, is Paul Michael Boyle, again from Chicago. So he's the third of the Passionists from America. And you see that there's he was very well known to travel throughout the world. He looked at trying to see how the congregation is emerging in Tanzania. He wanted, and he came as a canon lawyer, as a preacher, and he was very much trying to see the Passionists as an organization and make it professional or effective. He asked the major superiors to gather together in Lima, Peru. He looked at all these different. He tried to do consultative, take advantage of consultative opportunities, but he also wanted to make accountability very important. And it was my understanding is it's under him that the designation of mission era, classic mission era from the 1950s shifted. So the missionary territories now became the contributing territories. Essentially, what you see is the Passionist world of vowed members flip, so that all Passionists now become numerically as much as possible equal contributors to the way the mission is developing into the future. And then you see the same model was followed by Father Jose Abragoso. He looks at the communities in a permanent mission or in a community of mission. And he has general synods in the Philippines and Rome, in Riverdale, New York, Northern Ireland, and Japan. So the gatherings now are throughout the world, trying to get a better sense of what are the Passionists faced with. And by having it in these locales, you deal with enculturation, you deal with the sense of economics, but you invite now all Passionists of the world to see the world and make decisions in a new world context. It's one thing to always be in one location, but to travel to a location and have the hospitality of these regions can be a tremendous eye-opening and spiritual experience, and a unitive experience, and sometimes contentious, of clash of cultures. But you see the rich cultures that are emerging in international experiences and dialogue. And then you see Father Ottaviano. One of the things that's of value to notice about his background, he has a background in architecture. So we have to remember that Passionists come with skilled backgrounds of theology, professional life, interests, personal interests. And you see that same process where he goes to South Korea for meetings. He has meetings in Indonesia. He sets up the vice province in the Congo. He has a synod of formation in Korea. And he begins the process of trying, and during this time, along with his predecessor, to look towards this idea of configurations. What does this mean? And so I already commented on Father Joachim Rigo, but I want to conclude by, as you have listened to this, what have you learned? What does it mean? And if we look at Passionists who have passports, or you have passports, and you want to advance the Passionist sense of identity in your own life or with the Passionist mission, and you're interested in the Passionist mission, where will your spiritual passport, your civil passport bring you, and your identity lead you? Maybe you want to know more about the Passionists in Europe, in the Americas, in the Holy Land. Asia, Australia, or Africa. We are in all these locations. We need to actually continue to investigate these legacies and these futures. And I purposely try to ask us to think in a non-linear fashion by looking at leadership, spirituality, the ongoing understanding of civil church-state relations, and to turn the question around that the Passionists are made up of regional membership in regional areas that are on a continual collaborative dialogue basis, where everybody now is trying to help their regional voice, the larger ministry voice and religious life voice and formation voice that's still based in Rome. But this is an evangelical moment that is inclusive of culture and now world religions in dialogue, especially to bring the Passionists to life. So this is the history and background through this short Zoom presentation. And this is what the new leadership is invested to deal with. So keep them in your prayers. This is the legacy in which we have a superior general from Italy. We have skilled advisors in the General Council from Scotland, Portugal, India, Tanzania, Brazil. It was the 80 members who have been gathering in Rome. They entrusted their vision into these men. And if you're interested in the Passionists, these men entrust their vision and our vision as vowed members to you as lay people. Or if you just have come upon this lecture, we invite you to participate in ways that challenge us, thank us, or keep us accountable and yourself accountable in a world that needs hope and stability. So thank you very much for attending this lecture.